Hey YouTube, XCT here. Today we are finally going to get DA in the first domain via a Helpdesk account that we obtained earlier. And afterwards we'll find a way to step into the second domain via password reuse between domain users. So last time we obtained access to HDF Steward, which you can see here on the left. And if we go on this account, click reachable high value targets, we get this graph here. And this user is an account operator. So what does account operators really mean? Well, they can create users, they can create groups, they can reset user passwords, but there is one catch here: they can't do it on protected users or protected groups. This means if you're thinking like, okay, we just reset the password of the domain admin or of the built-in administrator account on DC, that won't work because these are protected users and yeah, you're not allowed to reset their passwords or change them otherwise. But you can see there's a group here called Password-Audit, and this is not a protected group, so we have permissions to change stuff on it. Yeah, what can this group do? Well, we can see it can DC sync the domain. So as soon as we have a user in this group, we can just obtain all the hashes of the domain and become domain admin. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to create a new user on the domain and we are going to add it to this group, and then we are just going to perform the DC sync. So that's the plan of attack. Let's actually do it. So first of all, I'm going to use proxy chains together with RPC client here, because RPC client will allow us to create groups and users without like having a shell anywhere. So let's do that. This IP here is the IP of the domain controller on the work domain. All right, and now we can do create dom user. Let's just call it support1, and then we can do set user info2 on this account. We have to provide 24 here because that's the attribute we want to change, and then we just set some password. And now we have a new account that has this password set. If we now do enum dom users, we should be able to, let me see. Oh, I had a typo here. We should be able to see all domain users, including our support1 account here. So this worked, and we actually have a new account on the domain. But there's one issue here, and I didn't really know how to do it. The issue is that, like, if you look at the RPC commands, there's none that actually allows you to add a user to a group. At least I didn't find it. So if you know that one, please let me know. So we can't really do this last step that we need, which is adding the user to the group. Also, there's another problem, which we will see later, that this user isn't even active. Like if you create it here via RPC client, this user is disabled. So what can we actually do? So we have this custom environment here, this virtual desktop environment. All right, let's create a folder here. Let's just call it support. And now we can also get a shell as this user we obtained earlier, this Helpdesk account, just by using run as here. So we do run as, then we have to provide the domain and user account. We want to run cmd and we have to give it the password. And now we are fsteward, as you can see on the top here. And now we are able to just use the normal net user commands. So we could do net user support1 domain. And you can see that account active is set to no. So this account is indeed disabled, but we can change that. We can just say active yes, and now it should be active. Yes. And we can do that because we are the Helpdesk, the account operator, right? A normal user, of course, can't do that. Okay. The other thing you want to do is you want to add the user to the Password-Audit group. So let's do that too. Okay, that should also be good. If we check the user again, we are now in this Password-Audit group. And now this user should be able to DC sync the domain as we've seen in Bloodhound. So let's actually try that. Let's do proxy chains impacket Secretsdump. Let's hope that this works. And yeah, it proceeds to dump the domain. Now our next goal is to get the administrator hash from the dump and then connect to the DC. And then we want to get an actual beacon on the domain controller up. So let's proceed with that. First of all, let's get the admin hash here. Just grab for administrator. Case insensitive, okay. And then let's use VMI here. Then we provide the hash, and this should give us access to the DC. Here we go. Let's again create a support folder. And then we want to get an actual beacon. We are going to use the same payload we used earlier, right? There's no really point in like doing another one now. So let's use PowerShell here to download it, just like this. And yeah, this hit my web server. Should be here now. Let's run it. And here we go, we get a beacon. Let's again make this interactive so we don't have to wait long for the video. Now we have a session, and we have the session as administrator on the domain controller. Okay, so let's think about how we can actually proceed into the next domain. Let's look at Bloodhound again here. And if we go to, I think, analysis, map domain trust, you can already see that there's another domain here called EU. And the trust arrows go in both directions. So this is a bidirectional trust. Work is trusting EU and EU is trusting work. What does this mean? Well, you don't get to like easily compromise the other domain right away. The only thing this really means is that using your user from work, and remember we have all of them, right? We can authenticate to EU, but we are just going to be a normal unprivileged user. And of course, it can be the case that if you like have a user in work, that someone in EU assigns special permissions to this user. Then this is called foreign domain group membership. This can be like on users or on groups. And there's a query here in Bloodhound to look for these. And right now we don't really get a result, but this is mainly because, well, we don't have Bloodhound data from EU yet. So how are we going to get this? Well, as I just said, every user in work can authenticate to EU as an unprivileged user. And this means that we can also just run Bloodhound against EU. And I'm going to use this CASM shell here, the initial one. And we're just going to get another beacon for this. So let's actually repeat what we've just done. All right, let's run it. All right, we get our beacon. Then we make it the session again, and then we can try running Bloodhound from there. Okay, one other thing I want to show before we actually do this is that you can actually also do it from Python. We did this before, it's nothing special, but there's an issue in this case. So the command would be like this. That's also in the wiki. You authenticate as the user from work, that's important. But as this user, you authenticate against the EU domain, and this works. There's just one issue. If I run this, here it hangs. And it's also pretty easy to see why, because it gets the wrong IP here. So the EU domain controller has two network interfaces, and for some reason, Bloodhound is getting the wrong one here. I guess it's doing a DNS request and just getting the wrong IP. And we can't reach the 22 subnet. We can only reach the 21.1. So this is failing at this point. You can make this work if you set up DNS chef correctly and just fake the DNS responses. Just something to be aware of. Like this error is fixable. You don't have to give up at this point. But I'm still going to do it from our beacon here because this is more the usual thing you would do. We want to go here, we do info. Now we are on this initial machine here, and I'm going to use #hound to get all the information I can get from the EU domain. We're doing execute assembly with the inline flag. Then we just run #hound here, which I compiled myself. And we give it the usual arguments like all, GPU local group, and then the domain. All right, can't really see any errors, and it looked like it worked. If we do an ls here, we can see that we actually have the Bloodhound zip here, and it's still on the machine. So we have to download it to our machine first. We can just use download here, the path on the remote machine, and then the path where we want to store it. We can just do let's call it bloodhound1.zip, and this looks good. Now we should be able to upload this here. All right, so now if you go to groups with foreign domain group membership and select just work or EU, we can see that now we have some data here. And the way this works is that when we set up the trust relationship between both of the domains, it created automatically these relations. So if we just go to help here, we can see the domain computers in work are also in the authenticated users in EU. And the same goes for the domain users in work. They're also in the authenticated users in EU. So this is what makes this cross-domain authentication work. It's the trust relationship that basically allows it. Okay, so how could we compromise the next domain? Even though we can see this here, there isn't really anything special, right? It's just authenticated users. Like normally, if you look for the foreign domain group memberships, sometimes you find the few users in one domain are admin on the other or the other way around. But this doesn't exist here. So we can't go that path. The only thing we're basically left with is either checking for shares, because as a low privileged user, we should be able to access the shares on the other domain. And if that doesn't yield anything, we should look for users that maybe exist in both domains. Despite these domains being different, they both end in unon.vl, right? And unon.vl doesn't really exist as a domain here, but it still shows that they probably belong to the same company or same group or something. So it's pretty likely that there are some users that exist in both of them. So first of all, let's check domain computers, because we didn't really see that yet in EU. And see members. There's only one that's not the domain controller, which is this one here. Let's see at which IP we can find this one. We still have this here, so let's just do a ping. Okay, and here we can see the IP. Same we can do for the DC. So the DC is at 222 and this server here is at 223. Normally we should be able to check the shares on this machine, right? Let's first do an nmap scan to see if we can actually reach it. Just like this through proxy chains. I only did a few ports here because it would take a long time, but you will see in a second why that's enough. Okay, so here we can see what the problem is. SMB is closed, RPC is closed. So from our machine here, we have no way of accessing the target machine. The only ports that are open are those for remote administration, like RDP and WinRAM. So we can't list the shares on this machine at all, even if we have valid authentication. The only thing we can really check here, and I'm going to do that quickly, is we can on 222, which is a domain controller, we can check the shares. We have to give it as a domain here work.unon.vl because, well, the user is from work. And then we should be able to see the shares. And yeah, you see the authentication works. And then we can look a bit around these shares, but I can tell you there's nothing there. The only thing we really get here is we see that this is also an ADCS server. So on the DC in EU, they installed the ADCS role. Okay, so let's try to go the approach with the users. So first of all, I'm going to use this hash list we got earlier, just going to prepare it a bit. And we get a list of users in the work domain. And you can already see here that this company is using a tiered administrator model, and it's also using it in the other domain. So there are users like SA here, which is the server admin, HD, which is helpdesk, service accounts, and DOM are domain admins. And you can verify this in Bloodhound if you want to. Okay, what we are looking for is users that exist in both domains. But you see, it's not necessarily a full match, right? There could be a user here. Let's see, let's just do it for K Morris. This is the server admin account, but like, if we grab here, you can see that this user also has a user account. So there's Kate Morris and SAK Morris. Makes sense, I guess, right? And this could also exist across domains. It's a bit tricky, but I think it makes sense. And this is actually how companies set it up sometimes. Okay, so let's also get a clean username list from the EU domain. We could either like try to export it from Bloodhound, but we can also go to our beacon and then do sharp view, just higher timeout value, get the domain users from the EU domain. And again, our user Melanie is basically allowed because of the trust relationship. All right, just call it eu.sharpView. Now we're also going to pass this one, just quick bash line here. Actually, I want this to be a T. And now we have the same list also for the other domain. One thing we can do now is just try to compare them, see which users are in both domains. We can do that just with bash like this. We basically read all users from EU and then grab our hash file, or we could also grab the one we already parsed for entries that exist in both. And there are a few actually here. Well, the default accounts, of course, but these also exist in both domains. So these are like the most obvious candidates to try, I'd say. We can just get their hashes. I already have it here. We try to authenticate against the domain and see that we actually provide EU here and not work, because if we provide work, it will just use the account we already have. That will of course work, but we want to see if this account also has the same password in the EU domain. So we have to provide EU here. All right. But this failed. So he has the same account in both domains, but different passwords. And the same thing we can also do for the other account we found, which is SAK Morris. But this also doesn't work. Okay, so this would be an easy win, but it's not that easy here. So remember what I told you before. There's these accounts here where a normal user also has an admin account, and the admin account is like the first letter of the first name and then the complete last name. First of all server admins in the EU domain like this. So there are actually 3 of them. K Morris we already know. This one doesn't have the same one. This leaves us basically 2 candidates for SA. And yeah, we also have to check the other accounts, basically like the DOM account, Helpdesk account, and so on. We just want to find if a normal user from the work domain maybe has a server or just somehow privileged account in the other domain. So we can basically do just a cut here, users from work, and we grab for, let's say, Morris. We already ruled that out, but you can see this way we find, and when a user from work has an account in the other domain, and also this finds us the SA account here. Okay, let's try this for the other ones. For Young, no hit, and for West, there is a hit. So this looks like this matches, right? Dale West, SAD West. This account is from work, and this account is from EU. So maybe this user is an admin in the other domain and is using the same password on both. We can again check with crackmap.exec with the hash that we dumped from the work domain, just like this. And this time this works. So indeed, we found a case of password reuse from Dale West of the work domain on his SA account in the EU domain. We don't have that many possibilities now, right? We saw that there's RDP and there's WinRM. And RDP usually doesn't work with pass-the-hash because network level authentication is default now. Could be disabled, but if it is enabled, you can't do that. So the only thing that we can still use with pass-the-hash here is WinRM. So let's try that. We are trying to WinRM to 223. This is the only other server that's not a domain controller in this domain with the hash from our dump and work. Let's try to connect. And we can actually do that. And yeah, there's no flag here, but as you remember, the flags usually are on the desktop. And the fact that we can actually go here tells us that we are probably an administrator. You can also check that here. This looks good. We are actually an administrator here on the machine. All right, that's everything I wanted to show for this video. If you're following along, try to escalate your privileges to domain admin from here. And in the next video, I'm going to show how to do it. As always, if you want to try out the labs, check out vulnlab.com. And thank you for watching. See you next time.